Less than 1% of criminal trials in U.S. history involve a former president, and even fewer reach a moment where a judge openly warns the defendant they could be removed from the courtroom. But that's exactly what happened, live, in front of jurors, media, and a packed gallery. What triggered this warning wasn't a document or a technical dispute. It wasn't a shouting match or a dramatic courtroom stunt. It was a person, an insider, someone who once operated inside Donald Trump's daily orbit. Someone who had access, who was trusted, who saw the unfiltered moments behind closed doors. And when this witness testified under oath, something changed. The atmosphere shifted. What began as standard testimony escalated into a moment that surprised even seasoned legal observers. Jurors weren't just hearing words. They were watching a former president react, visibly and emotionally. That moment mattered, not because of volume, but because of context. In any high-profile trial, jurors are trained to focus on facts over feelings. But when a defendant loses composure in front of them, it creates an impression that's hard to ignore. And in this case, it wasn't just any witness. It was someone who had been on the inside, someone who knew routines, habits, and private behaviors, someone who had been loyal. In court, proximity creates credibility. Jurors weigh testimony differently when it comes from someone close to the events. Someone who didn't hear about it secondhand, but claims to have seen it with their own eyes. That's what makes insider testimony so powerful. It turns speculation into a direct account. It forces jurors to stop imagining possibilities and start picturing specific actions. It doesn't just raise legal questions, it asks emotional ones. And one of the most powerful emotional questions is, why did this person decide to speak out? People close to power don't testify against it easily. They risk social fallout, financial damage, and even legal retaliation. So, when they do testify, it raises a simple human inference. Something serious must have happened, something they could no longer ignore. That implication alone can shift how jurors receive everything that follows. In contrast to political rivals, insiders carry a different kind of weight. They're not expected to oppose. When they do, their words pierce deeper. Because it's not just testimony, it's a fracture in loyalty. And that's what jurors felt. The courtroom wasn't loud, but it was tense. The kind of tension where every movement feels amplified. You could sense the weight of what was being said and the reaction it triggered. What stood out most was how the witness delivered the testimony. Calm, direct, no hearsay, no speculation, no qualifiers like, I was told or I heard later. Just, I was there, I saw this, I remember. That kind of clarity sticks with a jury. It doesn't need interpretation. It paints a mental image. It allows jurors to replay the moment in their minds, not as a theory, but as a scene. And once that scene takes hold, it's hard to erase. This is what prosecutors aim for. Moments jurors can see, not just hear. Moments that don't feel abstract or procedural. They feel real, grounded, tangible. The testimony wasn't theatrical. It didn't need to be. The power was in its precision. Specific actions, specific times, specific rooms. That kind of detail doesn't sound like guesswork, it sounds like memory, and memory is persuasive. When testimony shifts a case from confusion to clarity, from accident to intent, it changes everything. Jurors might forgive sloppiness, they might excuse miscommunication, but deliberate actions taken after warnings or official requests, that's a different matter. And that's what this witness described, not vague behavior, but choices. Made after it was clear the government wanted certain materials returned. In court, timing speaks. Volumes. Actions taken before a warning can be seen as careless. Actions taken after one, those look like responses. Intentional responses. That sequence creates a simple, powerful story. First came the request, then came the reaction. That story doesn't need legal theory to make sense. It fits everyday logic. It's what we all recognize from our own lives. People react when pressure arrives, and when they do, it's often revealing. That's what turned up the heat in the courtroom. Not just what was said, but when it was said to have happened. And then came the reaction. Not from the jury, from Donald Trump himself. Reports from inside the courtroom said he didn't sit quietly. He shook his head. He muttered. He became visibly agitated as the witness described specific moments. This isn't just a legal misstep, It's a visual cue to the jury. Jurors aren't passive, they're watching everything. Body language, reactions, emotional control. A calm defendant projects confidence. A visibly upset one signals something else: discomfort, fear, loss of control. When a defendant reacts exactly as damaging testimony is introduced, the jury notices. Even if they don't consciously register it, something clicks. That hit a nerve. And then the judge stepped in. If this behavior continues, the judge warned, you may be removed from the courtroom. That is not normal courtroom procedure. That is an emergency break, and jurors know it. When a judge who's supposed to be neutral calls out a defendant, especially a former president, it sends a message. This moment is not routine. This is serious. From that point on, the dynamic changed. The testimony now had something new attached to it: gravity. The witness didn't just say something powerful. It provoked a loss of composure serious enough that a judge had to reassert control. And that association, the link between emotional reaction and credible testimony, sticks. Once that shift happens, the defense faces a harder road. Their narrative becomes more difficult to sustain. What was once plausible deniability now feels like evasion. The courtroom lens changes. Jurors are no longer weighing paperwork. They're watching a person under pressure and evaluating not just what happened, but how they responded to being confronted with it. This is often where trials tip, not with a single bombshell, but with a slow stacking of impressions, all pointing in the same direction. And in this case, every piece of new evidence, every legal argument, every next witness was now being filtered through a new lens, one of awareness, intent, and personal choice. Even previously neutral facts start to look different. They no longer float in ambiguity. They're tethered to a pattern. And when jurors feel they're watching someone react to truth rather than defend it, the internal calculus shifts. They stop asking, was this a mistake? And start asking, why was this decision made? At all? That is a much harder question to answer, especially when the witness doesn't seem angry, or dramatic, or bitter, but calm, restrained, measured. That kind of demeanor reads as truth, not because the witness is likable, but because they appear credible. And in court, credibility always outweighs charisma. By now, the defense had no good options. Attack the witness too hard, and it might look like desperation. Downplay the testimony, and it risks seeming out of touch. Stay silent, and let the moment settle unchallenged. None of those are winning strategies. That's how you know the tide has turned. And here's the bigger picture. Testimony like this doesn't just impact one case. It changes everything around it. Other prosecutors take note. Other witnesses start to reconsider their silence. One insider stepping forward lowers the cost for others to do the same. Legal systems run on momentum. And this moment created momentum. A single courtroom exchange could end up influencing other investigations, other indictments, even other witnesses. But it's not just the legal world that reacts. The public remembers visual moments. They may forget the procedural motions, but they remember an insider under oath, a defendant reacting, and a judge intervening. That's what shapes public perception. And in high-stakes trials, perception becomes reality. So while this moment may seem like one chapter in a long legal process, it might be the turning point. Because the story has changed. This is no longer about documents. It's about decisions. No longer about confusion. It's about conduct. And when jurors sense that shift, when they stop hearing arguments and start watching character, there's no easy way to turn back.